Hey everybody, welcome to a special edition of SecurityGuideTV.com with my special guest, Tim Tremaine of OfficerUp.us. Now, I think we better start over in case you guys didn't hear me. Welcome to a special edition of SecurityGuideTV.com with my special guest today, Tim Tremaine of OfficerUp.us. Now, Tim was on the show a few months ago. He has a great book. It's about creating a climate for appropriate police behavior inside police environments. And today we're going to talk about peer intervention. This is a very specific part of what I think is really a great way to improve police relationships within a department. Because if inside the department works, outside the department works. So, Tim, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you. Good to be back.
So, give us a quick review of the book overall for people that didn't see the first show, and then let's talk about this peer intervention because this is a biggie. If the cops themselves can't police themselves and their behavior, nobody else is going to do that. It's just not going to happen. Period.
Correct. We've got to have a way for us on the front lines, both as officers and as supervisors, to be able to police ourselves in the moment, not after the fact. We've been doing that for quite a while, but we need to be able to do something, to have a mechanism, to have a technique so that we can intervene when things are happening to try to prevent or stop misconduct from happening. In the book, I really talk about two focuses. It's one point with two applications. First, I talk about the setting, really, what's been going on the last couple of years, and basically the post-Ferguson atmosphere that we're dealing with now in the police industry. And I talk about the importance of culture and climate within the police work environment. We need to understand what that does, what it means, how to manage that, and then talk about peer intervention, where one officer or a group of officers, when they see misconduct about to happen or happening, they can step in and stop that from happening. And so on the front end, we need to create a climate where we're not promoting that kind of illegitimate behavior in our police officers. We don't do things like cracking jokes, talking about people in a bad way, making these references. And I know that telling stories and kind of having this in-house camaraderie and things of that nature, that's kind of natural and normal. It'll happen with anybody, not just police.
Right.
But we need to recognize that needs to be controlled. That has effects on people. That is the socializing process, where if somebody, especially a new officer, comes in and hears about all these old stories of people getting in fights and people getting in chases and all these other kinds of things, they think that's norm, that's accepted, that's what they should be doing. And then when they get out there in the field and try to apply what they've learned in the academy, what they've learned in the field training program, and things go south, they respond incorrectly. And so we need to take care of that on the front end by managing our climate in the work environment. And then we need to take care of that in the moment by having policies, training, and practices in place to intervene when that's necessary.
Now, some critics would say, nah, you're a sergeant. It's written by a sergeant. Sergeants want to control everybody. And if it came from a cop, maybe that has a different message. What do you say to that?
Well, I didn't start out as a supervisor. I didn't start out as a sergeant.
Right.
I was a line officer for over 20 years before I promoted into supervision.
That's some good street creds. Good street creds on that.
I think so. I've got quite a lot of experience. I actually currently serve in a county setting, but originally I was in a city setting. There's one of the major cities in our state. And so I've got quite a lot of experience on the street in a city setting, which is where most of the problems are coming from. If you look at the incidents that have happened over the last 2 or 3 years. Now, so it's important to me. I've seen that.
So back in the day,
Go ahead.
Here's what I remember. Just what you said. I had to buy cops dinner. I was a rookie, right? Hazing. I had to buy dinner. I had to, I did all the reports. I did all the crappy calls, hazing. We heard the war stories. War stories were kind of part of training. But, however, in all my oral boards, and I must have taken 15 oral boards when I was testing to get hired out of the academy. Same kind of questions, very ethical questions. Hey, you see your buddy stealing something. What do you do? I say, don't steal that. What are you doing? I'm going to say something about it. I'm going to intervene. Well, would you tell the sergeant? You know what? I'd have to see how my buddy reacted to it, but probably I would report it to cover my ass, but I'm going to say something about it. Those were questions in the oral boards that were, first and foremost to test your honesty, how you're going to behave. And then you get into the culture, and the culture tries to change you away from that. So I get that part. Do you think, because you're still in it, and I got out, I don't know, 20 years ago now or something, do you think it's changed for the worse? Do you think this stuff is more prevalent than it was when I was a rookie?
I don't think it's changed for the worse, but it hasn't changed enough for the good.
Oh, that's a good point.
One of the points I make in the article is that these things have happened all the time. There have always been these incidents where there was an intervention that took place. I see somebody about to do something wrong or doing something wrong, and I say, hey, don't do that.
Right.
We all have stories about that. We've all seen it happen. We've all heard of it happening. But these have all been incidental. And it relates back to the ethical issues that you're referring to in the oral boards and the training. We've always had training on police ethics and so forth. But these practices haven't been institutionalized. And I think that's where we are today, where peer intervention policies and training need to be institutionalized so that they are accepted department wide and hopefully become accepted industry wide. So that even if I'm working, which I have to do in my context all the time, if I'm working with another agency, we've got it to the point where I can intervene on their behalf to help them, and they can do likewise for me. If they see me doing something wrong or one of my guys doing something wrong, that they won't just sit there and let it happen. Right. They won't just watch it and say, that's his issue. I'm not going to deal with that. They'll recognize that it's important for all of us to do the right thing all the time, and they would be willing to intervene and understand that they can do so without the fear of being disciplined or retaliated against or having to put up with any kind of negative pushback or feedback because they stepped in.
Well, it's an excellent point. Do you think that changing the culture with tactics can help us get that way? You know what? I don't know any cops, and I worked in L.A. and California. Maybe it's a little different on here, but and I work for 3 agencies, by the way, right? I cannot think of an incident where I worked with a corrupt cop, a kind of corrupt cop, a dirty cop, that sort of ethical thing. I think everybody was pretty ethical. What I did see sometimes were just poor tactics. Poor tactics led to poor treatment of citizens sometimes, right? Which created a complaint, which was completely unnecessary if you said, yes, sir, no, ma'am, right? Simple things like that. That's what I'm saying. So do you think we can change the culture on the tactical and strategic side of interaction? And do you think that that contributes to a lot of these, the proliferation of a lot of these cultural, I don't know what the word would be, procedures maybe, the way people act, officers in the field, and the way they act creates this negative backlash on them. And I don't know if they see it that way.
That's part of the solution. That's what everybody's been saying with all of these commissions and reports and studies, that tactics and training need to be improved, need to be addressed. The other part of the solution is better supervision on my end of the job, keeping track of what's going on out there in the field, being more hands-on, being more out in the field instead of in the office doing administrative stuff, seeing what's going on, being able to have input on what's going on, doing debriefings and things of that nature to work with the guys to improve how they handle calls and how they deal with people. But my point is that there also needs to be a policy set in the department from the top on down that explicitly explains to the officers of every rank that you have permission and the responsibility to intervene if you see something happen. And that's what's going to address what a lot of people like to call the code of silence or the wall of silence or whatever they want to refer to it, where supposedly there is an industry understanding that cops are going to protect cops. And that's where a lot of the complaining comes from, is that officers are covering for other officers' misdeeds.
Tell me,
And that's where a lot of the Black Lives Matter kind of issues come into play, is that they think that cops are acting bad and other cops are covering for them. And that's what we're never going to get past that until, as an industry, we accept that we are going to police ourselves as a matter of course.
now tell me what a policy might look like. Maybe you can walk us through where does that policy fall under? Obviously, the ethics section, but maybe it's more also in the tactical, strategic section or operations section. Walk us through what you might recommend a police department to do to get that put in place.
First, they would need to either develop or adopt a training program. There's one already in place called EPIC, EPIC, Ethical Policing is Courageous. It's down in New Orleans with the New Orleans Police Department. Jacob Lundy is the director of that program. They have put that program in place through their training division, and it is accepted throughout the department. Everyone in the department is eventually going to go through that training, and it is a set in their policy that they expect and demand their officers to understand what peer intervention is and to intervene anytime that they see misconduct. So it's a training aspect and it's a policy aspect, because one of the things that officers want to know explicitly is that they can stand up for the right, they can do the right thing, even if it has a negative impact on another officer or on their department in the short term. The important thing is doing the right thing and knowing that they will not be punished or disciplined or retaliated against in any form or fashion for doing that.
Now, what would the penalty be, internal penalty or procedure, if somebody is retaliated against? I mean, we hear about retaliation, workers' comp claims, we hear about it in other things. What might discipline look like for some guy that says, hey, I'm reporting something, it doesn't look good, this guy screwed up something, he did something that wasn't necessary? What might discipline on that officer look like? Not the reporting officer, but the officer that screwed up, for lack of a better term.
Those issues have already been set in place. We've had those for a number of years. If somebody does something wrong, there is a kind of continuum of discipline. It could be anywhere from a letter, a verbal counseling, to a letter of reprimand, to a suspension, days off, or ultimately termination. And even if it was a heinous violation, criminal or civil penalties. So those things have already been taken care of as far as an officer who is doing something wrong. He's either violating internal policy, administrative policy, or actually breaking the law. The issue is whether or not other officers who are a part of that, who witness that, who have information about that bring that to light. And that's been the sticking point, I think, for a lot of these people who complain about the police, is that they always assume, and with some justification, that there is a cover up, that there is some kind of a concealment, that there is some kind of code that we as police officers treat ourselves differently than we treat other citizens.
Well, I could see people thinking that, not riding in a police car and not understand the subtleties of the job. I could see people thinking that. I think it's more about, I don't know. I see my buddy do something that put him in danger. It's tactically incorrect. I say, dude, what are you thinking? You know, you could have got me killed. And you know, we have an argument about it in the car, or he says, yeah, I screwed up. I shouldn't have done that, and we come to agreement. But we work as a team on those issues. And if they're doing something that's completely crazy and illegal and out of control, which I don't believe in my career I ever really witnessed, you know, if that happens, so that's kind of we're going to the chief on that one, right? It's automatic. I guess what I'm getting at is, do you think that that this is somewhat subjective, right? I know you're trying to make it objective with the idea and the concept and the policies, which I think is great, and it does make sense, and we do need to do it. And the reason I asked about the discipline is some of these things could be very, very subjective as far as tactics, officer's discretion. In California, an officer has discretion to, you know, basically run his investigation and his arrest the way he wants to. And another cop can't really legally step in and say, hey, I want you to unarrest that guy or something. You know, absent something completely out of control and illegal. So I'm not sure if I'm phrasing this right, but there is this subjective ability of an officer to operate within a certain parameter and policy. And if you're at the edge of the policy, at the edge of the procedure, but you're still within it, how do you bring it back to center, I guess? Does that make sense?
Yes, I think so. There, everything is on a spectrum or a continuum. And there are some things that are questionable, some things that are kind of right on the line. You know, you phrase something one way, you could have phrased it a different way, it would have been better.
Right.
You make an approach like you're talking about, how you handle a particular call. You know, you park in front of a house and respond to an alarm call, as opposed to parking, you know, a house or two away and walk up to the house. Your approach is better, things like that. And then there are some issues of how you treat people that are somewhat subjective. Personalities come into play at this point. You know, I would handle something different than another guy that I work with would handle something different.
Right.
So those things will be taken on a case by case basis. If somebody comes up and tells me, hey, I think so and so did something a little tweaky, then we'll take a look at it and deal with it appropriately. It's not just an automatic thing. Well, you're going to tell on this other officer and he's going to get in trouble. That's not the way it works.
It does in some departments, unfortunately.
My point is, well, perhaps so. Perhaps so. That's not the way it ought to work.
Inside baseball, yeah. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
My point is that if you continue to let officers get away with these little things, then it grows and grows and grows. Typically, an officer's not going to go out there and just make a huge violation right off the bat.
Exactly.
Right out of the box. He's going to just do something crazy. It's incremental. And when you look the other way, you do something, you don't get caught, nobody seems to care or whatever. We're human, like anybody else. You know, you step over the line, the next time you might take a second step over the line. If it looks like nobody's watching or nobody cares or nobody's going to tell, what I'm wanting to do is get us to establish on the front end, across the board, that's not acceptable. And our expectation is that everyone, regardless of rank, regardless of position, is going to watch and first of all, intervene in that person directly. And here again, it's not something where we turn everybody in the department into a snitch.
Right.
That's not the point. That's not the result. It's that we want everybody to care for the other officer and to recognize that they have the permission and the responsibility to intervene. And so my first step is going to be to go to that officer and say, listen, this is the way I look at this situation. We could have done this better. I would have done this differently. I'm just pointing this out to you.
That's
And
an excellent
get
point.
some input into that office. Let them know that somebody else is watching, somebody else is caring, somebody else is concerned, and that there's another way and perhaps a better way to do what you're doing. And if it's getting out of hand, then don't stand there and just watch and let it happen.
Right.
Get that guy and pull him back, because that could be the difference between him having a career or not, him going to jail or not. It could be that serious. And so just don't stand there and let it happen.
Now, let's go to the flip side of this, because when you see corruption and misbehavior in the upper ranks, what's an officer to do? I had a lot of experience with this in my old department. I don't know, the chief was, taking cash for police cars from Tijuana, Mexico, and they couldn't find the cars. Just, you name it, racial stuff, all kinds of crap going on. And I started the police union, which had never been done before. They didn't have a police union in, 80 years. And then they started messing with me, right? I found a bullet in my mailbox with the name on it. And then I found a bullet in my box that said 187. And I got my beeper, remember beepers? I had a text that said 187. They shot at my house. You name it, they effed with me. So I got everybody together one day, and we talked about this as a police association. I went up to see the chief by myself and his captains and lieutenants, and I said, okay, boys, here's the deal. If I fall off my bicycle and scratch my elbow, you let me put a bad word in there, are not going to wake up in the morning. Am I clear? And they all said, all the chief said was, understood. And the other guy said nothing. And I walked out, and they stopped messing with me. They eventually got me on an injury, and that's another story. But I had to go up there and actually, threaten these guys to back off, because you know how cops are. We're all type A's, right? I wouldn't recommend people handling it that way. I just had other things on them, leverage and records and things, that they backed off. But that is a big problem in police departments, where do as I say, not as I do, in poorly managed police departments causes, I think, a lot of the friction, a lot of the misbehavior. Because if the chief and the brass and all those guys are misbehaving, why wouldn't the police officers misbehave, right? So how do we address that? I'm thinking maybe for discipline, we put in our procedures and policies that your case is reviewed by a peer group. So you have a supervisor and some of your fellow peers, something to balance it out. Does that make any sense? What do you think?
It does. One thing that we have to remember is that now we're in the internet age, and we're in the age of instant digital media. And so that has tempered and affected everybody's attitude on what they do and how they do it.
Right.
We're gradually getting everybody into the mindset that you need to understand and you need to act like you're being recorded and broadcasted into the entire world all the time, because you could be. That is a reality. Didn't used to be that way, but now it is. And you can be recorded, and anything can happen, and everybody can know about it. So that has kind of affected the approach, not only from the line officer, but also from administration and management and the executives in the departments. So we're getting around to that. I don't think that there is as much of an issue going forward with that level of corruption than there has been in the past. Now, that's just my opinion. That's just it makes sense based on where we're at.
Well, it's funny.
So the disciplinary issues.
I'm sorry, Tim. We have a delay in the signal. I apologize. Go ahead and finish your thought.
I was just going to say the disciplinary issues, those we have those set up, and I agree with having different levels, having different peer involvement. There's going to be community involvement now because that's one of the things that has come out as an important element of what's happened from Chicago, Baltimore, Philadelphia, Ferguson, etc., all those places that the community wants to be and needs to be involved in a more direct fashion in these incidents. So that's an element that's going to be added to what's the new disciplinary format, I think, going forward.
Now, it's interesting you use the word corruption, and I was speaking about some illegal things that are corruption, but really corruption to me starts at the very low level, and it's just exactly what you're talking about. It can be poor tactics that lead to, a liability for the police department. It could be for just an unpleasant attitude. A lot of things, are corruption. At the lowest level, if you stop it, you prevent the bigger things from happening. So I get that part. I think if we had peer review involved, and I'm not going to go to citizen review yet, right? But I hear you. It's coming. But instead of some captain who didn't like you when he rode with you in the police car reviews your case and says, you know what, you did something wrong, I say you throw it out to, a couple officers, maybe sergeants, maybe a group reviews it, has a discussion about it, and that becomes the middle, right? It's easy for one person to make a decision or a chief to make a decision, and that may not be the middle, the most reasonable position to take on that. So I think we are going to see more of that involvement. But here's where I'm concerned, and it's early in the morning for me, so I don't always function properly. So if I'm confusing, let me know. But when they took away civil service from chiefs, and most chiefs now are appointed by mayors or city council, and they answer that way, and they can be fired tomorrow. They become politicians. Now they're acting differently. They're not acting like a police officer per se. One of their functions is police, one's politics. And now they're responding to the public media, social media, as they should, right? But they're acting like they wouldn't have acted when I was a young rookie or when you were a young rookie. Now, I think we'll agree on that part. Now, if you bring that down to the police officer level and they got a camera on them and they have all this recording and stuff, they are now not acting the same way they acted when I didn't have that stuff or you didn't have that stuff. My suggestion is sometimes it's tactically effective as a police officer to get in somebody's face and say, go F yourself and put your hands behind your back, because that verbal command scares the crap out of them and they comply. And it's acting, right? A good officer is a good actor. And I was always tall and skinny and I couldn't beat anybody into jail, so I had to trick them or talk them into jail. And I use my verbal skills for that. So I am a little worried that this microscope, which we've always been under, but now it's on TV in 5 minutes, does not allow for the reality that officers can solve problems in many ways that might not look nice, but the guy's not bleeding, he's not traumatized, it's unorthodox, but the guy is not hurt and everybody's okay. I hope I phrased that correctly, and if I didn't, ask me, but what do you think about that?
I understand the point that you're making. The problem is that we don't properly follow up all the time with incidents like that. And one of my concerns is, how do we train, especially the young police officers? How do they learn? They learn first by reading, then they learn by being taught, then they learn by watching other people do it, and then they learn by doing it themselves.
Right.
That's the progression. And that learning curve never stops as a police officer, because it's not like we're making widgets. Once you learn how to make a widget, that's what you do, and you do it, and that's fine. Nothing wrong with that. But I've been in this business 30 plus years, and I'm still seeing new things. People still come up with amazingly new, ridiculous ways to get themselves in trouble.
It's true.
It's
That
it's
is
one of
true.
the things about the job that make it so interesting. You never see the end of it.
Yeah, that's
So
true.
you've always got to respond in like fashion. You've got to come up with creative ways to handle the creative ways that people come up with to get themselves in trouble and do bad things.
See, I
And
think.
so if we
Go
go
ahead. I'm
ahead.
sorry. Well, I think sometimes report writing fails us. Now, I happen to be the guy that they called every time if there was some giant caper that was convoluted and nobody wanted to write it up. I wrote it up because I like doing it. I love writing reports. And the example I gave you about using strong verbal commands, which would rise to swear words, whatever you want to call it, I put that in my report. Right? I had a guy once that long story short, domestic violence. He stole his kid on Christmas Eve, and at 3 o'clock in the morning, he's walking down the sidewalk, and it's freezing outside. And he wouldn't give me his child, and he took out my baton and I hold it over his head, and I said, "Look, I'm going to count to 3. I'm going to smack you in the head. My partner here is going to catch the baby. You're going to go to jail, and Merry Christmas, brother." And the guy looked at me, and his eyes got all big, and he handed the baby over, and he put his hands behind his back, and he said, "I'm sorry." Right? Now, I would not have smacked him in the head, but he believed I would. Right? And he actually came to the department a month later and gave me accommodation for intervening in his domestic violence case and helping him out. So I wrote every single thing I did in the report, exactly how I said it to him, what I said it to him. And they looked at it like, "Well, you said that to him?" I said, "Yeah, hell, I said it." Now, if I had not put that in the report and it went to court, corruption, hiding, that officer's thin blue line, they're backing each other up. What do you think about that? I think blunt honesty sometimes will help you overcome that image. Clearly, I didn't hit him. Clearly, threatening him, well, maybe under color of authority, I might have had a problem with that. But I solved the problem. The child was safe. He was safe. Everything was okay. I think we could do better on being accountable for our actions in the field, full accountability in that police report. And that's a critical component you can start training in the academy. Right? What do you think about that?
Absolutely. That's one aspect of the overall job that we need to do. Report writing is critical, not only to future prosecution, because that's where most of our situations go. Most of the time, we're taking an offense report. And so we're documenting what happened, what the elements of the offense were, what actions we took, and so forth, especially if it resulted in an immediate arrest. Some of it is just documenting our actions when we go and work a call, so that if something like that happens and they come back in and file a complaint, we're able to go back to the report and say, this is what happened. And so that is a critical part of training, of field training, and then of supervision after the officers get cut loose, because we review, I don't know how some of the other departments are, but we review every report that's written. So a supervisor puts eyes on a report before it gets approved and sent into the report management system. So there's always training going on there, because I can send it back and say, I don't understand what you mean.
Right.
This wasn't written well. Something doesn't make sense. There's something left out. So we've got that, interchange that's going on between the reporting officer and or the other reporting officers and the supervisor. That's true. The point that I'm, I guess, trying to make, if I could use the old hammer and nail illustration, is if the only tool in your tool bag is a hammer, for instance, being a kind of verbally harsh with people,
Right.
telling people what you're going to do to them, telling them what to do with themselves, and all this other stuff. If that's your only approach, if the only tool you've got is a hammer, then every problem is a nail, and you're going to smack every problem with that hammer. And if, as officers, we don't intervene and say, you need another tool in your tool bag to be able to deal with people, because not every problem. The answer to every problem isn't to make an arrest
Correct.
or to issue a citation. You know, there needs to be a whole spectrum of responses to deal with the different situations that we confront. Sometimes it's to do exactly what you're talking about. It's to jump in that verbal judo type mode and to get up in somebody's face and to get loud and to just tell them where they are, because that's the language they understand.
Correct.
That's
Right.
the kind of personality that they will respond to. But that's not the approach that needs to be taken in every situation. And if I'm looking, especially as a backup officer, I'm setting back and I'm seeing the whole thing and I'm listening and I'm watching to what's going on, what he's saying, what the officer's saying, and the back and forth. If I see that this is going south, I need to be able to step in, and that other officer needs to accept on the front end. He needs to understand that I'm going to do that. And we need to get to the point where our officers have agreed up front and expect up front that if they're going too far, they're taking the wrong tack on a particular issue, that their other officer is going to step in and intervene. That's what will keep us, hopefully keep us from stepping over the line in the first place. And that's where I want us to get, is not where we're having to punish officers for misconduct, but where we are keeping officers from creating those situations where they're going to get in trouble.
It's an excellent point. People use the term micromanagement as a negative, right? And it is. If I'm telling you what to do, then you're not really doing your job. I'm doing your job for you. But in this context, I would define micromanagement as making daily, hourly, small, incremental adjustments to behavior through example, right? For one thing, if you can lead by example with your partner in the car and you tend to be able to solve problems better, they're going to call upon you, which, I got a radio show. So could you guess that I used to talk a lot at the police department, right? There's no secret there. So if they need somebody that could talk, I'm the guy that they said, get Harold over here and talk to these people, right? So that kind of realization that each officer has a skill, each officer is good for a certain thing. There's an analogy in the corporate world where, don't hire somebody to do something they can't do and then blame them for it, right? So I think if we take your point and we do, like you just said, we get to the point where the culture says, okay, you don't take your baton out and say, let me see your driver's license. You got to use the progression of force on that one first, and then you get back in the car and they adjust in little ways. I think that's the best way to do it. And super good, high-performing police departments that have high-performing teams, they do just that. You don't see high-performing teams in police work that bitch at each other and nitpick and write people up and do all that kind of stuff. Am I wrong about that? Tell me.
As far as I know, yeah, I think you're right. You talk about the force continuum. What we need to also talk about is an attitude continuum.
Exactly. Right.
You don't step right into a call and give somebody the max bad attitude. You need to, sometimes if you can walk up to a call and sometimes you just know you're going to have to jump into this with both feet and do it quickly to gain control and get things back, separating people and all that other kind of stuff. Sometimes you have to do that, but not every time.
Right.
And so we need to approach calls appropriately, respond to calls appropriately. And that's kind of what you're talking about of managing the micros of the job and making those fine-tuning adjustments along the way. And that's what this peer intervention concept can do, because I can't be at every call.
No.
I can't see what every officer is doing all the time. But if my whole team is thinking the same way, and my team goes out with the attitude that I'm going to watch my fellow officer's back and he's going to watch my back, and it's not just for officer safety, but it's for work product. It's for what you actually do and how you handle the call. And so I'm going to have some input into that life, that other officer's life. And it's okay for me to do that and for him to do it for me. And then if we need to go to the next step and loop in a supervisor and get that management perspective for it, then we can. If we need to go to the next step, go to, the shift supervisor or wherever, you go up the steps as far as you need to go. But it starts with every officer believing and understanding that they have the right and the responsibility to take that step.
I think I was super fortunate to have worked one super good agency, Culver City, and San Gabriel. It had its charm, right? But they did things a little differently. But I love working there. Great guys to work with. My best training officers were at San Gabriel. I mean, that set me on my path as a rookie to behave in a way that was effective. And by the way, let's not define this as good behavior, bad behavior. In the end, it's really effective behavior, right? You're most effective. And here's what we did at Culver City. We had a big caper, and, it's a burglary in progress. It's a robbery in progress. It's code 3. It's officer-involved, not really shootings per much, but really like maybe a fight or something. Call's over. We all go meet somewhere, and we debriefed the situation. And we sat down. The sergeant, we had one guy, Walt Schick. Boy, what a good guy this guy was at Culver City. He'd get together and say, okay, how do we handle that? How can we do that differently next time? What do you suggest? We had an open, frank discussion about it. And we'd say, hey, Williams, you effed up, you dumbass. What are you doing that for? In that cop camaraderie, make fun of each other way, right? That was not mean, but it sounds mean to people from the outside. And I think that was very effective. I'd like to see this in intervention programs as part of policy, that you debrief certain types of calls that involve, let's say, if you got more than 3 officers responding, you debrief it or something like that. What do you think about that? That's learning. That's micro learning. Yeah.
Absolutely. And we do that, at least on my shift in my department, we do that quite routinely. And sometimes it's just we drive down the street, get away from the call location, pull into a parking lot, and stand around for 5 minutes and talk about it.
Exactly. Something easy.
That's a debriefing. Sometimes it's more formal where, if it's a large scale operation or something where we've gone out and done a warrant thing or a buy bust or any number of different things, and you get other divisions, other units involved. You go back to the station and everybody sits down and, you spend 30 minutes, an hour, whatever, going over all the details and do a serious major debriefing. It could be either one, anything in between. But where anytime you take to review what you've done and talk about it internally and do so positively, not just condemning somebody for screwing something up or pointing out somebody's mistakes, but let's bring some positive into this and say, this is how it could be done better. I would have handled it, a different way, and maybe we could do it this way in the future. Those kinds of things. Those are all good training opportunities to get your people to improve, because we're not perfect. We don't get hatched out of field training where we're 100% ready to go as police officers. Most guys are considered rookies for 1 or 2 years, after they get out of field training officer, because it takes you that long just to kind of get your bearings in this job.
It took me, and I've read this too, about 4 or 5 years where I felt, I think I'm very effective, right? About 5 years into that. We had a guy at Culver City, Tom Gabor, great guy, sergeant. I think he made a lieutenant. He came into briefing once in a while, especially when there's new guys that came in. And he told the story of how he walked into Bank of America one day on a 211 robbery by himself. Backup wasn't there. He intervened, and as the bad guy was, under the counter taking money and reached up to shoot, he shot him. All clean, all very good. Tactically, a disaster. And on film, you see the bank robber's backup buddy standing off in the corner with a gun under his arm. And instead of walking up behind Tom and shooting him, he walked out the bank. Tom's lucky to be alive. Tom used to come into briefing and tell that story and say what a dumbass he was for doing it, right? He fell on his own sword. And that was extremely effective. So anything like that, I think if we start at that level for this intervention, which it is happening. Debriefing does happen informally, like let's get a cup of coffee and talk about that. I think we can get there very quickly on that. I don't, I work for 3 agencies in California. I've talked to guys all around the country in smaller agencies. I have a sense that, the California, New York, Texas big department side of things is different than the little 10-man department in the middle of Nebraska. But basically it's all the same. So I think this is a good policy. I think it's a good way to do it. I think it does happen. And now with your book, you're defining what's going on already, and we're trying to bring that up into a view where people can say, "Oh yeah, that makes sense." I think it's great. Now, what kind of feedback are you getting on your book with this concept?
Well, let me respond first before I go there.
Okay.
I think one of the benefits of doing this is that we can make it a policy, and the community needs to see that this is the practice and the policy of our departments. And then I think it can help sharing with the community a little inside baseball on policing, because there are a lot of things, or at least some in the community think that there are a lot of things that police do that nobody knows about, or that the community just doesn't understand how the police operate in certain areas or in certain situations or something. And these kinds of things, if we open the door more to our communities and help them to understand, and a lot of departments are, putting their policies out there where the public can see what they are. That's one of the things that people have talked about. And I'm not convinced that, putting your operating procedures online is necessarily the way to go. Some of this stuff we need to keep it to ourselves because they are tactical, they are procedural. We're not going to let the cat out of the bag for the bad guys to know how we're going to approach a particular situation. But as far as, some of the overall policies, how we're going to handle things internally and how we do some things as far as the way we do business, that might be okay to let the public in on some of those things so that they can see and understand how we do things. And this is one of those areas, to be able to understand that there are debriefings, that there are supervisory reviews, that there are functions that we've got in place to be looking, and it all falls back under the umbrella of policing themselves. And so if we don't want the federal government, the Department of Justice, to come in and start calling all the shots and making all the decisions and looking at everything that we're doing and trying to run the departments, then we need to step up to the plate and do those things ourselves and bring our community in so that we've got the community support and there's community awareness of what we're doing and how we're doing it. We've got to do those things. So as far as feedback is concerned, there's been some positive feedback. A lot of people understand what I'm trying to say in the book, and got a lot of good feedback from some chiefs who agree that this is an area that we need to look at as an industry, that we need to understand a little bit better as an industry. And there's a lot of interest in the peer intervention aspect of it. Like I say, it's something that we've done informally. We just need to move it to the formal arena so that it's set in policy, it's department wide, and that we're moving toward it being industry wide so that there is some interoperability across agency, across jurisdiction, and where all of us as police officers in America are on the same page with how we police ourselves to do a better work at policing our communities.
So I went to law school for a year, which was dangerous because I think I know stuff that I don't, but I know the basics of liability and things like that. One of them is if you have a policy and you violate it, that can equal negligence, right? So one approach to any policy from corporate to police or whatever level is, you write policies that allow discretion on the officer's part. You know, may and should are words used instead of must and shall. Because if you don't make the shall, because it's 1 in 1,000 chances you couldn't do it, negligence kicks in. So if I'm going to write a policy that says we should have peer reviews after radio calls, cup of coffee, talk to your partner about it, that's a policy, which I think, you know what? I think that's a great policy. A lot of guys might poo-poo it, but it really basically happens anyway in the locker room with horror stories. Let's just make it more formal. How do you see those policies being laid out? If you say shall and somebody doesn't do it, you're bringing more liability on the department. And the bean counters and the chiefs that have to do these budgets think about that stuff all the time. Could we write these policies up as officers may use the discretion and may do this? What do you think? Does this make sense? I'm all for it, by the way, 100% for it. But we could get stuck in a place where it hurts the department sometimes.
To make that kind of a review function mandatory after every call or every kind of call has some operational drawbacks because it is time intensive. It's
Right.
manpower intensive. So I don't know that you could set a policy that says after every call or after every 2-man call or 3-man call or certain call type, like every domestic call, every whatever, you have to meet for 5 or 10 minutes or for a certain period of time afterward and discuss what went on. I think that's got some real operational difficulties. But if, in terms of your management philosophy or your management guidelines, that the supervisors are expected to do review either of the reports or of the call information or interviewing or meeting with officers individually or as a group, if that's expected and that's promoted, then I think that would be a great thing. And I'm sure there would be a way to write those policies or write those procedures, incorporate that into your SOP so that the supervisors understand that's what's expected and the officers understand that that's what they need to expect is going to happen, and that it's not necessarily a disciplinary thing where the supervisor's coming in there to gripe you out because you messed something up or you did something wrong, but simply they're wanting to know how you approached it, what your thought process was, what your tactics were, how did it go, how do you think it went, how would you do it differently now that you're looking back on it in retrospect? Is there something that you would do differently? And what do we learn from this situation going forward? And how can I take that as a supervisor? Can I take something that has happened here that we've talked about and do a roll call training?
Yeah, roll
Take
call.
2 minutes in roll call
Exactly.
and say, this is what happened. This is what we learned. This is what we think we ought to do about it in the future. Those are all things that can be very beneficial to the ongoing, everyday kind of in-service training aspect of police work.
And like I said, and I think you'll agree, super duper high performing police departments, high performing divisions of any company or operation or entity perform this way, right? There's no egos involved in this. There's no he said, she said, I don't like you. It's all to contribute to the team effort, and I think it makes a lot of sense. I remember I was in a situation at a police department where a guy was walking around with a pair of scissors and threatening people, and I got there, and all of a sudden it's like one of those Clint Eastwood movies where, telephoto lens on him, telephoto lens on me, we're facing off, and he starts walking towards me slowly, right, waving this thing, and behind him were two, super fat ladies, right? And if I had shot this guy and missed, there's no way I would not have missed them, okay? They were that big, and they were that close to him. And I had no background that I could engage him with my firearm. And he got to a point, and I couldn't retreat. I was in the middle of a parking lot. There was no retreat except to run all the way the other way. Then it puts the citizens in danger, right? Basically, I held my ground. He came up to me. I had the weapon down at my side, and as he approached, I smacked him with the baton. And if I'd lost that engagement, I would have shot him at close range, right? Nobody got killed. Everything's fine. Peer review. Commendable restraint. I think I got a commendable restraint commendation, meaning, hey, you could have shot the guy legally, but you didn't. Good for you. And we gave those out a lot, which is probably unusual back in the day. But I did get some peers that said, what's wrong with you? You should have shot him. That was stupid. You could have been killed, blah, blah, blah. But the department's position was commendable restraint, right? So there is a lot of dynamics here involved in peer pressure, working with your fellow officers. Let's face it, all cops have a lot of testosterone, females included, and you got a bunch of type A personalities. And some have more testosterone and more type A in that group, right? And you'll get these kind of pushbacks on it. But that doesn't mean we can't have a dialogue that criticizes each other in that camaraderie, insulting cop way that we all know what that is, right? And make it effective. So I'm all for this. I think it's great, Tim. Let me put up the book here. We can take a look at it. We're almost out of time, so we'll close up. It's Officer Up, Creating a Climate for Change in Police Environments. And officerup.us is where we can buy your book, right? And it's on Amazon and all that.
Yes. Yes. It's on Amazon and Barnes & Noble.
All right, good. And are you working on any second editions or anything like that, or adding to it, or? Nope. I can't believe this. So right when we close the show, we lose Tim's audio. I can't hear you, buddy. All right. Well, we got everything in before it cut out. So I want to thank you for coming on the show. And let's take a look at this book, officerup.us. I've read some excerpts from it. Excellent book. And I know a lot of my fellow police officers may disagree with some of this stuff, but just keep an open mind about it, right? Because what's happening now just ain't working very well, is it? And the feds are going to come in and take over police departments because they think they know better, and that's going to be a disaster, right? So thanks for tuning in to a special edition of Security Guy TV, and we'll see you next time. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and all those social places, and visit securityguyradio.com for our podcasts, all right? Good night, everybody.